Hello, in this video we'll be looking at the coronavirus mortality rate. Before I jump into my analysis, let me frame up the problem that we're trying to solve. Let's take a look at this following hypothetical example. Let's say in week 1 the country gets 10 new cases. In week 2, 5 of those 10 die and 5 recover. In week 3, the country gets 90 more new cases. So now they have 100. The question is, what is the mortality rate in this country at the end of the week 3? Is it 5%? After all, 5 people died and 100 people have been diagnosed with the coronavirus. Or is it 50%? Because out of the only 10 cases that had an outcome, only 5 recovered. I would argue that the true rate is 50. However, the way all of the mortality rates are reported right now, the numbers we're seeing is 5. Because of the exponential growth of new cases, we're getting so more cases every day that our mortality rate is definitely skewed. In order to address this issue, you will see that I have made some changes to our mortality rate page in our dashboard. The first thing that I've created was a calculation that tried to adjust for growth in new cases. So I've introduced a new calculation and I'm calling it an effective mortality rate. And the way this calculation works is I'm going to take the average number of cases from day 10 to day 5 or day 6 effectively. And then that will be the basis for how many cases I have. And then I will take the deaths from the most recent 5 days. And I'm going to divide those deaths over the sum of new cases to understand what the effective mortality rate. We are still not clear how long it takes for a person who has been diagnosed with coronavirus to die. So that ratio, day 10 through 6 as a foundation for cases, and the day 5 for 1 for the foundation for deaths is a perhaps a crude approximation, but it certainly works much better than what we're doing right now when we're just dividing the total deaths by total cases. And as I demonstrated in the deck before, when the cases are growing much more rapidly than deaths, the mortality rates are definitely skewed. Let us take a look at our dashboard now and see how we can analyze our death rates better. So if you saw my previous video, I only retain this one chart to the right. So in this one chart, in the x-axis, we're looking at cases per 1 million, which in my prior video I argued was a much better context for how many total cases are per country, because it normalizes those cases by the size of the population. And then on the y-axis, we have a traditional mortality rate. This is the rate that you will see if you listen to any press conferences, if you look at any reports. This is the official mortality rate. What you see on the left is a similar chart where you see cases per 1 million in the x-axis, and then you see my effective mortality rate in the y-axis. And what we see in a trend chart, we are looking at two different metrics. We're looking at number of new cases, so we see a trend of daily cases. And then the white line, the stepped white line here, you should look on the right. That demonstrates what the effective mortality rate is on that day. So what I thought I would do is I would click on several countries and we can analyze whether we're getting more insight into mortality rates from these new capabilities have been added to our dashboard. If you remember from my prior videos, I said that we have several clusters of data. We had Italy and Spain. These are the countries with very high mortality, but they have also very high number of infected people per 1 million of population, right? So Italy has 2,100 let's zoom in. So Italy has 2,133 cases per 1 million, and Spain has 2,816 cases per 1 million. We also observed Switzerland, that also has very high number, 2,438 people per 1 million, but also has a very low mortality rate of 3.39%. At the same time, I was talking about the other cluster, the cluster of these European countries, United Kingdom, Netherlands, France, and Belgium. At the time of my last video a week ago, their mortality rates were significantly lower than they are now. So UK is currently sitting at 9.6%, France is at 8.6%, Belgium at 7.35%, and Netherlands at 8.46%. And at the time of the video, they were significantly lower, and I was basically hoping that as time goes by, those countries will move closer to the way Switzerland is reacting rather than Italy and Spain. However, it's clear that this cluster of countries is actually moving in this direction, so that's not good. At the time, however, I had no ways to predict which way those countries were going, and now I think I do. Let's take a look at UK. So you can see that today UK is sitting at roughly 800 cases per 1 million of population and 9.59% of mortality rate. However, you could see that in terms of the effective mortality rate, the percentage is much worse. It's 20%. And also, we could see by this chart that in the mortality in UK was kind of high, pretty much from the very beginning. So on the 16th of March, we'll already see mortality in this pretty high number. Let us see what the world looked like on March 16th, or rather March 18th. We see that as of March 18th, United K mortality was 5%, both effective mortality and overall mortality. However, we see that effective mortality started rapidly climbing up. So by March 22nd, United Kingdom mortality was roughly 4.6%. However, we see the effective mortality was already 10%. So if I had those two charts together, on this day, I could already say that this mortality is not going to stay this low. I knew it was going to go up. Then I see that mortality kept going up. So the next day, effective mortality jumped to 20%, which overall mortality was still fairly low. So we just kept getting a lot of cases, and those cases were confusing the mortality numbers. So you could see that you could use this technique to very well predict of what we think is going to happen with overall mortality. So if effective mortality starts coming down, like we see here, then that's a prediction that overall mortality will eventually come down. So if I click on United Kingdom, we see that right now for United Kingdom, early on, mortality was low. Mortality jumped very high, over 20% by March 23rd. Then over several days, mortality dropped. So again, it's hard for me to explain why that happens. Maybe this, a lot of times what happened in US, a nursing home got attacked. A lot of old people got affected. So when number of cases is fairly low, one bed kind of hospital or nursing home, one bed facility get attacked, and then you could see this kind of spike. What's troubling is that effective mortality keeps growing up for UK, and the question really is it the fact that the system is getting overwhelmed? It's hard to know, but we could definitely see that mortality right now in UK is at roughly 10%. This is not going to be the final mortality. I'm predicting right now that over the next several days, UK will move much closer to where Italy and Spain are. You can go ahead and play with this data set. You can click on Italy, and you can see that in Italy, again, mortality was very high. So this bar is colored by overall mortality, effective mortality, and you can see that mortality was consistently very high in Italy. So we're not seeing mortality number being affected rapidly by number of cases coming in, right? So even when the cases were low, mortality was high. When cases are high, mortality is high. And then now that cases are coming down, effective mortality stays the same. So again, I'm not going to try to explain these numbers quite yet. I'm going to spend a couple more days thinking about it and trying to assess more data. But I think it's interesting that effective mortality has not changed in Italy. So there's some ideas and there's some opinions that the reason we have such high mortality in Italy is because of pollution in the air, population demographics, and so forth. But I think it's notable that effective mortality, stays flat, even though initially all the reports were saying that we have spike in mortality because the system is being overrun. You would expect that effective mortality to go down now that the cases are coming down, and we can assume that the country has set itself up much better to react and treating the disease, but we're not seeing that mortality go down by much. So I think it's interesting about Italy. Same thing happened in Spain, right? In Spain, we see effective mortality coming down. So I would expect that right now Italy is sitting at roughly 9%. I would expect that Spain might come down a few basis points over time. One country gave a lot of compliments was Switzerland, and you could see that Switzerland had effective mortality below 5% pretty much from the get-go. We see that effective mortality is coming up a little bit, so most likely Switzerland will go up from where it is right now at 4% to maybe closer to 5%, but we're not seeing a huge growth in effective mortality. So most likely the overall mortality in Switzerland is going to be fairly stable. Lastly, I have to obviously talk about USA. So I think so far things are progressing not too bad. So we saw effective mortality spike up to 5%. Early on, we had higher rates, and that was, again, because when we had just few cases, we had some very unfortunate instances where nursing homes were affected, where a lot of people died from the same hospital. So that probably explains why we had fairly high effective mortality early on, and now it kind of stabilized at roughly 5%. One number that I would say is really interesting, and I'm gonna just tease about this, is let's take a look at China. So there's a lot of conversation and a lot of critique with respect to whether we can trust China's numbers. Well, you think for yourself. When the cases were high in China, mortality was low. When the cases are in double digits, 35, 50 cases, we see mortality is very, very high. So you judge for yourself. My gut is telling me that this is not making sense, right? So my gut is telling me that mortality was probably very similar then as it is now, effective mortality. So this is an interesting data point that I think allows us to understand a little bit of how reliable numbers are coming out of China. Before I look into the county cases, I wanted to make one salient point. Note that countries with highest mortality have the high number of cases per 1 million, generally speaking, right? So we could look at this cutoff point here and see that Netherlands, France, Belgium, Italy. So once you have over 1.5 thousand cases per million, you tend to have this high mortality. And US is just barely breaking over 1K. So I guess everybody who lives in US is pretty nervous right now. As US keeps pushing this direction, what is going to happen with our mortality? Let's go ahead into our cases by county and see if there is reasons to be nervous. And obviously there is a reason to be nervous, but let's see how we're doing so far. So you could see that actually things are not looking that bad. So we have 2 counties that are having number of cases per million population that's an order of magnitude higher than Spain, Switzerland, or Italy, yet the mortality is very low, right? So when we look at Westchester County or Rockland County, we see that mortality rates are very low. So thus far, looking at the effective rates, so again, these are the effective rates, it's hard for us to say right now that the system is being overrun, because looking at these numbers, looks like, again, it's hard to say. Some counties have certain amount of hospitals, population density, all that. Totally understand that, but at least so far, it doesn't look like we're hitting that saturation point where we don't have the capacity. So the rates are fairly low. So there's several counties that are worrisome. So, for example, the Essex County, New Jersey, we see a higher rate, and we see that things go from green to red. So effective rate right now is at 8. The as-is rate right now at 4. So I can certainly predict that it's not going to stay at 4 over the next couple of days. It'll go up to 5, 6, maybe higher. Okay. King Washington County, we see that number of cases is dropping. So we see a spike in mortality here. So again, maybe we'd have to take a look, but there's such a few number of cases, and number of cases per million is fairly low. So again, anything that's high is obviously worrisome. But right now, it looks like most of the counties are well below 6%. And then if we look at the Cook County, let me make sure I click on this correctly. Okay, this is the Cook County. Looks like the Cook County, that's another county that I know is projected to be a hot zone, but right now the effective mortality rate is fairly low. And before I wrap up, just wanted to do a quick overview of how to get to those pages. So if you go to the main dashboard, you will see it here. It will probably be filtered to US first. So if you want to look at it by different countries, if you look at this page for different countries, you have to clear out the US. If you would like to see the mortality by country, you click on this button here, and that'll take you to the analysis by country. And if you would like to see the mortality by US county, you click on the link here, and that'll take you to this page. I will post the link to the dashboard in the description of this video. Thank you for watching it, and I will see you again soon. Bye.